Hey everybody. So we did we in the last video we moved this validation. We created this new validation service, and the general idea of this validation service is to have basically have like sort of the generic well, there's kind of two concepts that I'm trying to sort of shoehorn into this thing, and one is that we'll have like a generic validations that don't aren't specific to Angular forms. And then the other is sort of some kind of keeper of the truth of what the validation is for a given object. And so, and then there's kind of two parts of that. There's one is like, okay, what is like, how does the dictionary work that is going to basically hold these these validations so that because the general idea is some kind needs something where I can say, hey, this is the object I have, what is the validation for it? And the reason I need that is because I don't foresee this UI being the only way to enter um, new enter things to be displayed. um, this these forms and all that. I suspect there'll be other ways, and I want to be able to validate those things, and I want to know. I want something where I don't have like a duplication of functionality between the two, where I'm not trying to maintain that sort of knowledge in two places. But I guess the first things first is we want to create, I guess, a function that says like get positive floating point validator, um, that then will just sort of return the results from this. So it'll accept a string and then return uh, that string here, and then um, I guess if it's fails, no, if it's um, true, like if it's good, if it's valid, we'll return a null, and then over here we return an array that has the name of the failure and the value set to true. So that's weird. It's definitely weird, but anyways, we definitely need to break this apart so that this sort of from here to here are sort of in a more generic way. So that's pretty straightforward, I think, and I think Angular will do a good job of maintaining scoping and all that if we pull that stuff in here. I think having the same name makes a lot of sense. Um, I think just the location within the uh, like the fact that this is up at the services and then this is down in the toolbox and then the name UI validation is good enough to sort of differentiate what the purposes of these things are. So basically we want this, but instead of it taking a control, it's going to instead of returning a control or instead of it returning a function that has a control, it's going to return a boolean, and it's going to accept a string um, value string, and then it's going to run this test, this regex, and instead of it's just gonna return. I think we can just return that. So basically, it's going to take the value, it's going to test it against this regular expression that ensures that it is a positive floating value, and it's going to return true if it is and false if it isn't. I believe that's what's going to happen here. I'm not super confident. And then this right here, like naming it this way, is so important. It seems sort of silly right now, but trying to figure out what the heck this does backwards is extraordinarily difficult. In general, this is probably not. You don't want to assign something and then do that, but I don't know. You get lots of arguments. In general, I do like this. As a general rule, I do like sort of naming things here. Otherwise you need to add like a comment, and then if the comment, the data, if the logic changes, the comment doesn't make any sense anymore. But anyways, so now we need to get access to that. And I think the easiest way to get access to that is just to bring it in as a service. And I think the best way now, as of Angular, I believe it was Angular 18, is to use this inject function, and then just say, let's see, and we'll just say validation service. Make this a small v just for convention, equals. I like how I saw blue in. Oh my gosh. Inject. And then push this little button here, tell it to import this thing, and then let's just comment that out for the moment. So then value. It's weird. Oh, okay, so this is interesting, yeah, because the way we're creating this this function, it won't have access to this. So we need to get our validation service, our validation. So it's validation. I'm just going to call it validation for now, and then we'll say this. Okay, so that is a function, right? We're getting a function, and now we're going to run that function over here. And we're going to call it validation. All right, so that, either that makes total sense to you or it's like blowing your mind. But basically, this function here is going to be executed. And there's no way to really know under what context it's going to be executed. So over there, we just don't know wherever this gets what the this is going to be. And that's why we couldn't use the this function. But this we do know where it's going to be. This function here, we know where it's going to be executed. So we do know that we'll have access to this variable. There's a variable called this. And so we can get like a copy of it, and then this validation service function doesn't really need anything, right? It's a standalone function. It doesn't like it can run and it doesn't need any. It doesn't use any kind of. Um, it's what's known as a pure function. It just can do whatever. It doesn't need access to the state. It can just run by itself. So so that's nice and clean. So we say, hey, give me a copy of that function. We do it there. Now it says, hey, with our copy, we have this. We can run this thing. Now, um, so there's that, and that is gonna like it's kind of like one of those things that you have to spend a lot of time try to understanding this whole concept of closures, why this has access to this, but it doesn't. Why line 24 has access to what's on line 15, but it doesn't have access to this part of it. So yeah, if I type in this, like Angular tells me, the Angular compiler tells me, hey, we don't know what this is. Like you can't, um, you know, we can't do that. So you will see in maybe some older code, like a concept of that. They'll say like const that equals this, and then they'll be like that dot, and so and really like for me when I was trying to really understand this stuff, the one thing that kind of brought it all together, sort of the last piece of the puzzle that made this all connect, was that the function keyword, one of the very first things it does is it creates a variable, and the name of that variable is this. So it creates its own new this, so that this gets wiped out. The old this gets wiped out, and that's why the that equals this will work. Um, and then you can reference that. But things, it's a bit of an anti-pattern. Things sort of spin out of control pretty quick when you start going down that path. I just it's such a bummer that they used the word this. I wish they'd use like uh, uh, instance context or something like that. Like some other word that was less common in our language. Um, but let's just see if it works. That's it. Theoretically, it should work. I've definitely worked on plenty of things that should have theoretically worked, especially in this working on these scoping issues. Um, yeah, so that worked. I have to admit, like when I typed that letter there, I did feel a bit of anxiety because if that didn't work, then I was going to go to a very dark place trying to understand what the heck is going on. Because it seems like every time I feel like I do get a good grip on this, there's a wrench or something gets thrown in there. So we probably don't want line 23 anymore. I was going to call it this anymore, but and then we do need to kind of take a deeper look, and is an empty value okay? And we probably shouldn't be okay. That probably still should be like if they send a empty valuable value, um, we probably should return an invalid floating point. See, right now they're making a decision that if it's null or empty, we're going to say that it's fine. But I would rather send this. I'd rather send the object saying that it's an invalid floating point, and then let's get rid of the now incorrect function. So the hope is that now nothing weird went on that, and you can never tell because this is that we're working with a third party uh, piece of code, and its internal behavior is a bit of a mystery. Yeah, so that's good. I think that's a really great thing. So yeah, so I guess a quick rundown is in order here. We have a let me go show. We have a a service that's sitting inside of the toolbox, which is uh, a folder that contains components. And we have validation that's specific to the Angular Forms components. And what we've done is the um, we've pulled the generic parts of that validation and we put it into another service called validation service that's purpose is to maintain generic uh, validation. That's its only real reason for existence. Now, um, so now we have a function that we can use to get to check for floating points. So that's good, and that's part of what I think needs to be done. And I am on a path that I really have never, like, it's new for me. It's a novel path for me. So it's like I feel like I'm like a mountain climber. I've climbed tons of mountains and done tons of stuff, but this is one mountain I never got around to in my career. And so now it's time for me to go and finally knock this mountain out. And that's the idea of creating a reusable, enterprise friendly, developer friendly validation scheme. Um, and the piece that's missing here is I really do need a generic way to find out what kind of validation fog density should have. I don't want that knowledge. I don't want that to be buried in here in the let's see, scene manager. Like the way I know that the knowledge of the wisdom of that fact that fog density uses this kind of validation is buried down in this component, and I don't want it to be down there. And the reason I don't want it to be down there is because when we do get the external importing done, I need to know what kind of validation fog density has. And there's no way that I can go all the way down deep into the component and get that information. So I need to store that information higher up here in the validation service. And so that is going to be the next step. And I'm hoping that once we've come up with some clever way to do that, we're done sort of inventing this validation architecture. And then hopefully it just works great for what's next. It's going to be the near and far. Once we implement near and far for fog, then that same validation should work, and I should be able to just easily just update a couple things in places where it just makes sense. And then once that's done, then we move back over to animation, which there's a lot of cool things I want to do in animation. I want to add a new kind of animation and then probably add some sort of validation to animation. And then once we have the validation in animation, some sort of validation in animation, then, well, I don't know if validation, actually, I don't think animation needs validation. Now that I think about it, we probably, when we get to mesh and we add something in mesh, we'll add a new validation there. So that'll be good to kind of have a break from validation in animation, and then we go to mesh and we'll add something, some kind of validation to something like, let's say, X position has to be a positive floating point number, or something like that, and then we can be like, see if it's easy to work with, or if it ends up taking a week and a half to figure out what we did at this point in time. There's just no telling, a lot of times you spend it, a lot of times coding is very, very ironic. Like you work really, really hard to make something super, super maintainable, and you find out that you've made something that is almost impossible to maintain. and your only goal when you were starting was to make it maintainable, and this the act of trying to make it maintainable. In that act, you actually made it extremely unmaintainable, and that is, one of the curses of being a developer is that a lot of times you end up doing the opposite of what your intentions were. Anyways, happy coding, everybody. Bye.